Crystal Stokes here with Get Stoked, a podcast with real and raw conversations with leaders of all types, business owners, managers, executives, and more. Get stoked by their honest and insightful stories and key takeaways that you can use to improve your leadership abilities. Now, if you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe and share it with others. Your support and feedback really makes a difference. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. So, hey, everybody, Crystal Stokes here, and I am with Ben Ballamy joining me. He is founder and CEO at Cheese Studios. And Ben, I'd like to just pass the mic to you and let you introduce yourself. Maybe you can tell us also not just what you do professionally, but a little bit about the rest of your life too, if you want to share.
Sure. So, first of all, happy to be here. Thank you for having me on. A little bit about me. I have spent my career in professional services, mostly in management consulting, a tiny little bit in strategy consulting. Through my career, I ended up starting to work with top-level executives in the strategy world, specifically with a company called World 50, where I managed a group of of strategy officers. I'm working with supply chain officers now. But with World 50, the whole idea was that we brought together C-suite officers and put them together for really safe conversations, off the record, no competition, no solicitation. And it occurred to me in the process that, by using that model, we could actually address things like sustainability, things that are common evil challenges in the world today that, if we can pull together top level executives and thought leaders and investors and all people who are trying to solve the same problems, that we would actually be more effective at solving these problems. And so that brings me to where we are today at Cheese Studios. We have a community of chief supply chain officers working together with technologists and investors and thought leaders. And we are trying to change the world of supply chain. We're going to branch that out into cybersecurity, information technology, and other functions in the business that are changing. And yeah, it's really all about kind of harnessing the power of alignment and finding areas where we can leverage this community and find ways of changing more effectively, faster, and with less risk. Outside of work, I just like being outside. I've got a wonderful family, wife and 3 kids. We spend a lot of time in the mountains and the beach. I spend as much time as possible in nature. And live in Palo Alto, in downtown Palo Alto.
Love it. As you know, I was in Palo Alto for a few years myself, and I think you and I are both East Coasters. Were you was it Georgia?
That's right. I grew up in South Carolina and North Carolina. After graduating from UNC, I went to Atlanta and spent the first 17 years of my career there. And moved out here somewhere 6 or 7 years ago, and I've not looked back. But yes, and you're an NC State graduate.
I think we're rivals, aren't we?
That's right. That is right.
We did some bad things. I remember before football games, sometimes it got pretty bad. But I'm also, now that I'm graduated, I can say that I'm a UNC fan as well. Now that I no longer attend NC State, I've cooled down a little bit.
I wish I could say the same.
You're true. I love it. So this podcast is all about leadership. And I'd like to ask you your view on leadership and a little bit about your journey. As some people, I think the word leadership, they might say, I don't know if I resonate with that or not. When I think of leadership, I don't mean just in a professional sense. I also just mean how you show up in your life, how you lead your life. And I'm very curious to hear about your journey, your evolution through time, and what's brought you to where you are now.
There's a lot in that question. First of all, I think my thoughts on leadership are really it's so dependent upon the person and the personality. And authenticity, I think, is at the core of strong leadership. Is if you are the type of person who's really good at standing up front and leading the charge, then that's the way that you need to do it. Or if you're the type of person who's better from a support structure, that you're there to support those that are working with you, then that's the best way to do it I personally find that I'm better at the support part, at understanding kind of the pieces and knowing where the pieces come together and making sure that those pieces are brought together in the right ways, that we're all communicating properly and that we're all in alignment. Actually, as you asked that question, it flashed into my mind that my wife and I are watching We Crashed, the kind of the drama version of the WeWork saga, and we're watching Adam Newman, and as much as you can say, he was maybe even fraudulent in some of his the way that he led. He was just a genius at standing up front and of telling this story, and he was an amazing salesman, and that worked for him. You can say whatever about the business model or about the ways that he invested in hyper growth and ignored some of the more common sense parts of running a business. He was an amazing person at leading from the front, and I'm not that guy. And neither one is right or wrong, and they both can work really effectively. I find that I'm just more suited to being someone who, I don't want to say leads from behind, but I feel like I'm more in support of my team, and that by getting the right people and creating a sense of alignment, making sure that we're all in touch and coordinated with everything that we're doing, you can really harness the power of people and create the force multiplier where 1 + 1 is greater than 2. And so that's really where I think about leadership and my particular flavor of leadership.
I really appreciate you bringing that in. When I was studying at the Coach Coactive Training Institute, they had a model of leadership that describes leading from the front, leading from the side, leading from behind, leading from the field. They have all these different types of leadership, and they're all necessary. And we do tend to have an area that we gravitate towards. And I appreciate that you highlight this, because I think a lot of people, when they think of leadership, they just imagine leading from the front, that very visible, bold action taker. But we don't realize that even with that one person in the lead, they usually have their supporter on the side, their supporter in the back, the supporters at the field. So, the role that you do is absolutely critical, and you just know what you're good at, and you lean into that.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that gets people in trouble is when they try to be the leader in the front, where they might be someone who's more just born to be a leader from the side or a leader from the back or a leader from within. And I think that inauthenticity it becomes obvious. You see that this person is doing this it's a show. And that's, I think one of the fundamental things that you have to have, regardless of your position of leadership, front, back, side, or otherwise, is that everybody knows that that's really you, and everybody believes in you. And when they start to see the flaws or the cracks in your, this is an act, this is not who this person is, then you lose them. So I think that's a really important thing to know about yourself, and also to be confident in, is that you can be a leader from whatever position you're in, front, back, side, or otherwise. You don't have to be Adam Newman. You don't have to stand up front and be the charismatic, extroverted leader, because not many people are that charismatic, extroverted person. And if we only allowed those types to run our businesses and our governments and our militaries and our social structures, then I think we would end up being steered in an unfortunate direction.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering your perspective on what you've seen, given the nature of your work. Like, you're around leaders all day long of all different types. And I wonder if you have any stories you might want to share, of course, keeping confidentiality, of the challenges that you see with leadership in general. I think you just named one, as perhaps inauthenticity, when people feel the pressure to show up as leading from the front, and it may not be their natural strength, and then things start to fall apart. Are there any other big challenges that you're seeing amongst leaders, or even that you've experienced yourself personally?
Yeah, that's another big question there. I'm trying to organize my thoughts here, so I may go off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think one of the things that I I think I'm seeing a lot more now than I've seen before is leaders sometimes feel like they have to have an answer for everything. And in the situation that we're in now, I feel like, and it's not just now as a short-term thing. I think now the new reality is this reality of just incredible volatility in the world around us, and whether that's volatility in your political structures, your socioeconomic situation, or trade barriers, or conflict, or the environment around us. Fires in the West and crazy storms in the East. No one can be the all-knowing person, and then this idea of top-down leadership, where you have everything being administered from a central all-knowing source, I think is just such an incredibly flawed way of looking at things. And yet I think there's also this really outdated, antiquated notion of leadership where you have to have all the answers. And, when someone doesn't have the confidence in having great people around them and really empowering the people around them, you end up in a situation where you can really, number one, you can lead your organization in the wrong direction. Number two, you can lose the support of the folks around you. And I just think that it's really, really incredibly important to be okay with not having all the answers. So that I would say is one of the big flaws that I've seen. I think another one that I alluded to a minute ago is this notion of you have to be the person who leads from the front, or you have to be, whatever book I read on leadership last week, I have to be that person instead of just being who you are. And so I think that's a really big one as well. It's just this idea of authenticity and not having to be fit the model. I don't have to be George Washington. I don't have to be, Adam Newman. I'm beating the Adam Newman drum because it's so fresh on my mind. If you haven't seen it, check out We Crashed. It's really entertaining.
Yeah.
And when it comes to leadership, it's really, I think, a case study on leadership.
I love it. I'm thinking about two different aspects of my training that sort of drove this home for me, what you're describing. One was on the Enneagram, a personality typing system. And I was very much not interested in systems like that. I thought that they were limited and put people in boxes, and I was a hard sell. But the teacher that taught me, the way he went about teaching it won me over. And what evolved from me learning that particular system was how unique and dynamic we all are, each individual, and we have something to bring to the table. And that by trying to fit ourselves into one narrow confine of a certain type, like to behave in a certain way that's seen as popular or whatever's in style right now, really defeats the purpose of contributing to this bigger picture. And it was interesting for me learning that, one, to apply it to myself and say, well, what is my style? How do I truly want to show up, and what's authentic for me? But even more interesting for me was finally being able to see other people as so different. I think that we, as youngsters, as we are growing, we tend to think that people are like us. Like, don't we all think the same way? What do you mean you don't like chocolate milk? It's the best. And so to really have an openness and a curiosity about the people around me and how they wanted to show up, or the ideas they had to bring to the table. And I've noticed now when I'm around others who are in leadership positions, do they have that openness and curiosity about the people around them? That's, for me, a real mark of wisdom. People that can have that openness and curiosity. And what you were saying about coming in, not pretending to know all the answers, it's so refreshing. I was working with a client at Facebook, and this person was sharing their struggles with their boss, feeling like they're just not heard. Whatever they say, it just sort of passes right through their head because it doesn't fit what they want to hear. I was like, that's a perfect example of, if you're not fitting into the cookie cutter mold, you feel discarded. And it's very frustrating and kind of in some ways demoralizing to the people who are trying to just contribute.
Yeah. And I think that's a couple of things. Number one, you should empower everyone around you, regardless of what Enneagram persona they fit, or, and there's, the HPDI, there's all these different, ways of categorizing people in the way that they think or prefer to think. And, to say that you can't be a leader unless you're X, or you can't be a contributor unless you're Y, or, that this is how you were born, and so therefore you're now determined to go in this path, I think is just such a flawed way of thinking. And I think, by the way, what you're talking about is a really new concept, that we can be leaders as introverts. We can be leaders from behind, from the side, from within. And I think we can look back on history and see thousands of years of people leading people off cliffs and into awful situations because they were really charismatic, right? Because they were the people who like to be in the front, and everybody looked at them as being, oh, that's what a leader must be. I think what you described about the Enneagram hesitation you had, to me, is just that you don't like those things, or you didn't like those things prior to learning more about them, because you thought, man, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to find out that I'm not a leader. I'm going to get into this and I'm going to find out that I am destined to be, this role or this industry or whatever it may be. And that's just not the case. And yet I also don't think that I think this is new thinking. And I don't think that this is something that's embraced everywhere. I think that in certain organizations and certain cultures and certain even geographies, this is something that, we're just starting to awaken to.
Yes, I agree. This reminds me of even like high school and early college, these sort of prescriptive tests that would say, you're good at this, so you should be that. And I remember like my father telling me, my grandfather was a psychologist, and he tested the kids, my dad, and then he kind of told them based on their testing, and he said to my dad, you're not the brightest, but you're really good with your hands and whatnot, so you should probably go into the trades. And my dad became a carpenter. He said it in his mind made him decide college and school isn't for me. I was like, wow. And I think about in school, these strengths tests and the things that sort of narrow the focus of what I was good at. Like for me, it was science and math and the things that were technical. But lo and behold, in my whole journey, I ended up going the full spectrum over to psychology, which is very soft and always evolving and changing. And it's hard to have hard metrics on it. We try our best to have evidence-based science, and I love the CBTs, but there's a lot that we just don't know. So I look back on that and just think, I'm sure there were benefits to it. And maybe it helped me make decisions and not feel so anxious about having too many options. But at the same time, I definitely noticed my brain shut off anything that was like liberal arts. Like, no, that's not for you. And I can
that would explain NC State over North Carolina right there.
I know, exactly. It's so true. Yes. And I was also remembering a person that I knew when I lived in Vienna for a few years. He had founded or started an investment banking company, and he was a type 9, which is a peacekeeper mediator, very introverted, wallflower, but he was a leader of this amazing company. And I watched his style because he invited me in to work with his team. And he just was like the champion cheerleader, just supporting them to show up fully, to do their best. And it was a very dynamic team. And I thought that was really amazing to see that style come through.
When you say that, it also brings me to another thing. And this kind of goes back to the question of flaws in leadership. And that is, I've heard people say, something to the effect of, I couldn't hire that person. That person's going to be my boss, like that. That's, and it's such flawed thinking. And, to the point that you're making about your friend in Vienna, it's his ability to have the right people around him. I truly believe that an effective team, number one, you have to have the right pieces in place. It's easy to lead a team when all the right people are there. And once you have the right people, I'm going to sound like Jim Collins here, but getting the right people on the bus, but then figuring out where they sit and creating that alignment. And once you have alignment, you become just such a strong force. I'm the things that I am the most into outside of work are things where this alignment creates this sense of flow, and whether that's the alignment of a storm in the Gulf of Alaska creates a swell that then grows over the thousands of miles until it finally gets to the coast, and it matches up with a wind that's coming from the shore, and it hollows out waves, and you're riding the gravity down it's everything aligns, and the whole system is aligned, and it has this feeling of just you belong, and things go well, and it's smooth. And when you have the right people that are all in alignment, when you have in the business world, if it's a business, it's in alignment with the ecosystem that's around it, you can get that flow, you can find that success. But it all starts with making sure that you have the right people, and that the right people are in alignment. And so whether you call that a cheerleader for the people that are there, or whether it's the orchestrator, and again, I think that goes back to whether you're on the front or the back or the side or the middle. I think regardless, you have to have the right team. You have to have alignment on that team, and the situation around you has to be also in alignment. The business context, the ecosystem that you're participating in, it has to be. I mean, you're never going to win in a fight against the tide, or a fight against gravity, or a fight against a system of hundreds or maybe thousands of companies that are all playing in the same way toward the same end goals. And so creating that alignment and constantly reinforcing and empowering that alignment, I think, is such an incredibly important element of leadership.
Oh, I got to ask you this question. What do you have advice for, let's say there's a company, someone in a leadership role who's responsible for this team that they manage, and they feel that, say they inherited this team, that these people are not really interested in being players. They were just hired because they happened to be there at the right time. But when it comes to company culture, they're not into it. It's just, there's a lot of, say, drama, negativity, resistance. And yet there's fear from the leader. I've just seen it so many times, to clean house, to hire and fire, the fear of, oh, it takes so long to hire new people. How do I know if I'm going to find the right ones? What if I just end up with people that are exactly the same? We can't afford it. There are so many reasons just to stay with the devil, Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you seen this? I'd love to hear your advice on getting
Two things pop up. Mm-hmm. Two things immediately pop up. Number one is, in the situation that you inherit, it's almost like when you have a knot in a string or in a cable. If you continue to pull, it's just going to tighten the knot. And so adding stress to that situation and trying to force productivity in a team that's really fighting productivity it's just going to end badly. And so you need to find a way to de-stress the situation, and to get these, to just take the pressure off of the team. And some of that is just by creating an environment where people feel comfortable and where they enjoy being with the team that they're with. And so I think it's really important to find what that is, to find, a way, and whether that's, the water cooler talk, and, making sure that everybody gets their opportunity to check in and talk about their weekend, and whether that's, the old, cliche, like, let's go to the ropes course and, do physical problem solving together, and, hold hands and sing Kumbaya, whatever it is. It's important to get away from the actual cause of the stress. And so, I think part of that is also, it's enabling people to be themselves. It's empowering people. It's hearing people and making sure that they feel like they're heard. And so, in addition to doing those things that de-stress the team environment, I think it's really important to pull them all aside and find out what motivates each of them, and find out what what is not motivational to each of them as well, and make sure that they're in the right seats in the bus. And then the last thing I'll say is, I've in my career, I've had the fortune of speaking with some of the best leaders in the world. And I have to say that the most common thing that they will tell you when you ask, what would you have done differently in your career? They would say they would have been quick to get rid of people who didn't belong. Mm-hmm. And as I think about some of the best leaders that I've ever been around, I think Frank Blake, who led the Home Depot for a number of years, is a former GE guy, is probably, in my eyes, the most incredibly charismatic and powerful leader I've ever been around. And that was his first answer when I asked him that question: what would you have done differently? And he said, for those people that were not a good fit, I always wanted to, give them that benefit of the doubt, give them that extra time, and I should have just trusted my gut from the beginning and put them in a better situation. And then sometimes a better situation is a situation that's not working at the same organization. It's like a bad relationship. You feel this feeling that you have to force it, you have to make it happen, and you're living unhappily for the time that you're in this team that's out of alignment. It's better for both parties when you're not in that situation.
I understand. I deal a lot with the sunk cost bias too. We've already invested so much time and energy. How could we possibly give up now? But we don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole. I think that could be a topic all of its own in a podcast. I really find it extremely interesting. Something that was really compelling and helpful to me was a certificate that I did at Cornell in high performance leadership had a module on how to diagnose the team. And I think that we often don't take the time to thoroughly investigate, which is what you were saying initially, what's really happening here. You can't just look at everybody and say, you all are terrible. But why? What's happening? Nobody wants to underperform. It doesn't feel good to come into your job every day and not want to be there. There's something happening, and trying to sort out the origin, or maybe there's multiple origins. And then what do we do about that? Takes time. And I think many companies feel kind of oh, really? I have to take more time and energy just to diagnose it. But once we have a proper diagnosis, then we can start working on the treatment plan of what we're going to do about it, which may or may not involve letting some people go or changing their role in the company. Like you said, the seat on the bus. So I really appreciate you bringing that in. And I'm going to segue to, I have one question that's more personal and dying to ask it, which is, it's weird. Do you have a particular superpower that you may also say at times can be your kryptonite?
Wow, that's a tough one.
I know.
I think this is like that question where, in the interview question, what's your biggest weakness? And, I work too hard.
I know.
No, I care a lot about people, and I find that I am always going to be too long. I'm gonna wait too long to make a change that's going to hurt someone, even if it's even if it's at the detriment of the team and the time that person is still there. If I have to make a hard decision about letting somebody go, that to me it's a really, really, really difficult thing for me to do. So I think, my empathy is one of my biggest strengths as a leader. And I think it's also one of my biggest vulnerabilities as a leader. Yeah, I think I would stick with that. I do.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. And I'm also going to steal the question that you mentioned earlier, which is, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what kind of advice would you like to give?
This is actually an easy one for me, because I had a moment in my life I'll never forget, and it coincided with a pivot in my life. It was one of my really good friends who has made some of the most courageous decisions you've ever imagined. We're on the side of a hill talking about a situation personally that I was in. And he said, you have the ability right now to choose between two options. You can choose the easy option or you can choose the courageous option. And the people that I know who choose the courageous options are the happiest people that I know. Mm-hmm. And, I then flash forward a couple of years and my wife was she was interviewing Tim Ferriss, and he was at the time working on something that he was kind of testing on her. And he said, I have this theory that the people who have the most hard conversations are the most successful people, right? That if you choose the easy route, if you choose having the easy conversations, if you avoid the hard conversations, you're not really going to get yourself happiness. You're not going to get, you're not going to do that well. You're not going to succeed. You may end up, middle of the pack, but at the same time, having the ability to make a courageous decision, having the ability to have a hard conversation will put you in a better place in life. It'll put you in a better place as a leader. It'll put you in a better place with your family, with your friends. So that's definitely the answer that I would give to that question.
Oh, that hits me right in the core. I grew up with my father and I are very similar, and we're both very comfortable with conflict and difficult things. It was just sort of our nature to go right at it. And, most of the rest of the world, I don't think operates that way. And as a woman too, we're kind of taught to soften that direct approach. But I've noticed through my own evolution, just as a human on this planet, also through what I gravitated towards in graduate school, which was exposure-based therapy, which means if you're afraid of it, you go towards it. So you're afraid of spiders, we're going to introduce some spiders into your life. You're afraid of travel, let's get you on the bus. And
this is good marketing for Crystal's practice. If you're terrified of something, just know that she's going to surround you with it.
We do it. It's gradual. I like to do the frog thing you were saying, like with turn the heat up slowly. But it's really important. I think a lot of the work that I do with my clients is helping to reinforce having difficult conversations with yourself and with other people. It's a lot about boundaries and how do you know where that boundary lies within you? How do you communicate that? How do we move things forward? How do we take risk and expand the zone of comfort to be bigger and bigger? All those things really interest me. I find it extremely compelling. I think about these things a lot, and I would agree that that's where the juice of life lives. Right on the edge, you have to be somewhat uncomfortable, and that's what growth is. Growth requires some discomfort, like kids getting their teeth coming in. If you want to say, no, I don't want you to have pain, you can just inject them with something that stops growth hormone and their teeth will stop and they'll be better, right? No, you want your kid to have teeth. Like these things, these analogies might seem silly, but it all kind of, it works in the world, putting ourselves in those positions to grow. I really appreciate you bringing that in today.
Of course. I have to say, I just wish that had happened earlier. I was probably 35 years old when I had that conversation. And I think about that conversation almost on a daily basis. And when I'm faced with a decision, sometimes it's just a trivial thing. Sometimes it's a major life-changing thing. That's the first thing that pops into my mind is, am I choosing the easy route here or am I choosing the courageous route?
Love that. I'll plug one thing that I think people listening might find helpful, because I think this comes up a lot with our partnerships, like romantic relationships, having fear of having a conflict. And, what I love the Gottman Institute. I think they do wonderful research. And a lot of what they talk about is that it's not about having a conflict-free relationship. That's not a good relationship. That's an artificial relationship. A strong relationship is one where you can have constructive conflict and repair. So I love this idea of having really good skills at repairing with a person if you've hurt their feelings or you've been hurt, to know that we can talk through it, understand each other, and then move forward. And that creates a real sense of resiliency. And I mean, that applies not just to romantic couples. We can do that with anybody in our life, to be willing to have difficult conversations, knowing that on the other side of that, we're stronger.
As the husband of an Israeli woman, a very strong Israeli woman, I can tell you I couldn't agree more, and she couldn't agree more. And I think that's a big piece of my family life, is that there's nothing in our home with our kids, with each other, that if it's a problem, it's going to be addressed. And, therefore we don't, we're not problem free, but our problems don't last, right? We talk ourselves through them. We get over them. There's also one other thing that I'll throw in here, and that is, recognizing that, and I think there's some religious, there's a Catholic prayer that's, recognizing those things that we can control, and being, okay with the things that we can't control. I think is also a big piece of what we're talking about now. Is, I think, to be happy, to be a good leader, to be just a successful person, you have to recognize that there are a lot of things in this world that are outside of our control. And just being okay with that. And then taking those things that we can control and making sure that we are controlling them. And I think, the more we can be clear about what those two things are, and then within those things that are within our sphere of control, taking control, and being upfront and being straightforward and addressing the elephant in the room instead of trying to tiptoe around it. I think that's a recipe for a happy life. I think that's a recipe for a good leader, and for a good family. And, I think just all around, success, however you want to define it.
I agree wholeheartedly. I have a saying with some of my clients that had a history of, we call it, sweeping stuff under the rug. Say, now we're going to live in a world with no rugs. There's nowhere to sweep the things. It's all out. We're going to have to talk about it. And just to have that strength, knowing that it's okay to take ownership of these things and come forward, have a courageous conversation, work your way through it. There's always the other side. We're just going to get there.
And then letting it end. And that's the other thing, is once you've scraped the wound of all of its infection, you have to let it heal. You can't keep scraping a healthy wound at that point. And so there's, the final part of that, I think, is a really important thing. You cannot continue to go back to things. You have to look forward. One other thing that I my career, my journey, whatever you want to call it, has opened me to is this idea of yes and it was a Second City. Second City, is that right? Yeah, that's right. The Chicago improv troupe that Stephen Colbert and Tina Fey and all those guys came from. Someone from there, I think it might have been the director of Second City, wrote a book that was all about the yes and approach. In improv, if someone brings up, whatever it is, you have to just say yeah and build on that and continue building on it. And if you continue to look back, why did you bring up the a gorilla with a top hat in this improv scene? I didn't want to talk about. No, you can't do that when you're on stage, and you can't do that. I think in life, is you have to just accept the fact that what just happened, you can't unring that bell. You have to then roll with it and continue to make the best of it.
Ooh, that is so good. Yes, and that's great for teams too. Like it's an icebreaker exercise. It's so fun, and it's so applicable to our life. I love all the stuff that we've talked about today. I think we covered so much, like such a broad spectrum of leadership just as a human on this planet. I really appreciate your time today. And what I wanted to do when it comes to wrapping this up is, I'm thinking about people listening today, maybe interested in what you're up to. If you want to say a little bit more about Chi Studios, currently what you're up to with that, and how people could find you and reach you, the best way to contact you if they did have questions or just wanted to hear more words of wisdom around leadership as well.
Yeah. So, basically with Chi Studios, the alignment that I was speaking about before, we're trying to coordinate alignment among the big parties and big industries and big functions. And so, when you think about any change that happens in let's just use, our first use case in the world of supply chain. You as a big practitioner, it doesn't matter how big you are, the biggest companies in the world, Microsoft or Apple, you can't just make these sweeping changes and become, immediately, completely, carbon free and all these. You have to take your supply structure, your ecosystem with you, right? You have to bring your suppliers and your suppliers. You have to bring the technology providers and the investors in the space. And this is a journey that the entire ecosystem goes through. It's a lot like I think system dynamics are a part of all of this. And whether you're looking at the system as the supply chain system or the system as the natural environment around us, if you evolve too faster than the system, you evolve to the point of extinction, right? If you evolve too slow, if you evolve in the wrong direction, you extinct yourself. And so our whole process is about creating alignment in entire systems, where we can accelerate our evolution, where we can become these things that we dream of, with sustainable companies, sustainable industries, with social, social sustainability as well as environmental sustainability. When I say that, so we're looking at doing this in other use cases, not just the world of supply chain, but also cybersecurity and information technology and marketing and sustainability, and you name it, where you have these corporates that are playing within a much bigger ecosystem, and that entire ecosystem needs to change. If you are interested in what we're doing, you can find us at www.chi-studios.com. We are really kind of, I would describe us as being in the second inning of a 9-inning game here. And we have really big plans of not only creating this neutral, unbiased structure where we can take our clients with us on evolution, but where we can actually build solutions that help everyone. And it's really a neat process, and watching these really powerful people align in their visions, align in their efforts, and start to come together to form leverage around major movements in the world. So we're super excited. And Crystal, it's been wonderful to be on your program today, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely, Ben. I am stoked to watch you all grow, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.